The first-class cabin was quiet and peaceful. A black man slept in his seat after a long night of work. The flight attendant looked at him and frowned. She did not check his ticket. She just called security. Big mistake. In 30 seconds, everyone would regret it. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was 6:30 a.m. at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Terminal C was busy with tired travelers rushing to catch early morning flights. Coffee shops were packed with people desperate for caffeine. Gate agents were announcing boarding calls. The smell of fresh pastries mixed with jet fuel in the air. James Carter stood in the priority boarding line for Flight 289 to Miami. He looked exhausted. He wore a simple gray hoodie, black sweatpants, and old running shoes. His backpack was worn and faded, with a small tear on one side that he had been meaning to fix for months. To anyone watching, he looked like a college student going home after spring break. But James was not a student. He was completely exhausted. The kind of tired that goes deep into your bones. The kind where your eyes burn and your head feels heavy. The kind that comes from working 40 hours straight without rest. He had just finished emergency talks at a factory in Dallas. The talks went all night and into the early morning. Workers were about to lose their jobs. The company wanted to close the factory and move operations overseas. James was part of a federal team trying to save 1,500 jobs. The negotiations had been brutal. Union leaders were angry and desperate. Company executives were cold and focused on profit numbers. Lawyers argued about contract terms. Workers waited outside in the parking lot, holding signs, praying for good news. James had worked through the night, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine, eating stale sandwiches, barely taking bathroom breaks. His team had reviewed financial documents, proposed compromises, made phone calls to Washington, D.C., and finally found a solution that both sides could accept. They finally reached an agreement at 5 a.m. The factory would stay open. The workers would keep their jobs. Families would not lose their homes. Children would not have to change schools. A whole community was saved. But James was completely drained. His body ached. His throat was sore from hours of talking. His mind was foggy from lack of sleep. He had 90 minutes to get to the airport for his 6:45 a.m. flight. No time to go back to his hotel. No time to shower or change clothes. No time for anything except grabbing his already packed bag from the hotel lobby and catching a taxi through morning traffic. But he had to be on this flight. He had an important meeting in Miami at 1 p.m. Missing it was not possible. The meeting was about new safety regulations that would affect thousands of flights across the country. First-class passengers may now board Flight 289 to Miami, the gate agent announced. James walked forward. He scanned his phone at the gate. The machine beeped green. The agent waved him through without looking at him. He walked down the jet bridge toward the plane. All he wanted was sleep. Just 2 hours of sleep on the flight to Miami. James stepped onto the aircraft. First class was at the front. It had 12 wide leather seats. Soft blue lighting. Everything looked expensive and comfortable. He found seat 2A by the window. He dropped his backpack on the floor and fell into the seat. He did not wait for a welcome drink. He did not look at the menu. He simply put in his earbuds, closed his eyes, and within 1 minute, he was asleep. He did not see the flight attendant watching him from the front of the plane. Carol Hayes stood at the galley arranging champagne glasses on a silver tray. Each glass had to be perfectly clean, without a single fingerprint or water spot. She was 48 years old. She had worked for Skyline Airlines for 16 years. She was proud of her experience. She was proud of her perfect attendance record. She was proud of being chosen to work first-class flights. Those 16 years had taught her many things. She knew how to handle difficult passengers. She knew how to serve meals efficiently. She knew every safety procedure by heart. But those 16 years had also taught her something else, something she never questioned. They had taught her what a first-class passenger looked like. Carol believed first class was special. It was not just about bigger seats and better food. It was about maintaining a certain standard. A certain image. A certain type of passenger. In her mind, first class was for business people in expensive suits who worked on laptops and made important phone calls. For celebrities traveling with sunglasses and designer bags. For wealthy older couples dressed in golf shirts and khaki pants, talking about their vacation homes. First class was not for young men in hoodies and sweatpants. Not for people with old backpacks and worn shoes. Not for people who looked like they should be in economy class, or maybe not on the plane at all. Carol had been watching James from the moment he boarded. She had been standing near the aircraft door, greeting passengers with her professional smile. "Welcome aboard," she said to the man in the navy suit. "Good morning," she said to the woman with the Louis Vuitton bag. But when James walked past her, something in her expression changed. Her smile became tighter. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She watched him turn into the first-class cabin with a feeling of unease growing in her chest. She noticed his clothes immediately. The old gray hoodie that looked like it came from a discount store. The black sweatpants with a small stain near the pocket. The worn white running shoes that had clearly seen better days. The faded green backpack that was patched in 2 places. She frowned as she watched him sit down in 2A, one of the best seats on the plane. A window seat in the second row. She felt something rise in her chest. Not quite anger. Not quite fear. Something in between. A feeling that something was wrong. That something did not fit. That there was a problem she needed to fix. "Lisa," Carol whispered to the younger flight attendant. Lisa Martinez was 26 years old. She had only been flying for 4 months. She hurried over to Carol. "Yes, Carol." Carol pointed at James in seat 2A. "Did you see that man board?" Lisa looked at James sleeping by the window. "Yes, he scanned his pass at the gate." Carol shook her head. "Look at what he is wearing. That seat costs $1,100. Does he look like he paid $1,100? Lisa hesitated. "Maybe he used miles. Or maybe he is an athlete. Or maybe," Carol said, "he sat in the wrong seat and hoped no one would notice." "But the gate agent let him through," Lisa said quietly. "Gate agents make mistakes," Carol insisted. "Especially in the morning rush. I am going to check his ticket." "Should we wait until boarding is done?" Lisa asked. "No," Carol said firmly. "Senator Davis is boarding in 5 minutes. He sits in 2B. I will not have the senator sitting next to someone who does not belong here." Carol walked down the aisle with determined steps. She did not crouch down to speak quietly like training taught her. She did not use the soft, respectful approach that the airline manual specifically required for handling passenger issues. She stood directly over James like a teacher scolding a student who had broken the rules. She reached out and tapped his shoulder. Hard. Not the gentle tap you use to wake someone politely. 3 sharp, firm taps that carried authority and accusation. James did not move. His earbuds blocked all sound. He was deep in the sleep his exhausted body desperately needed. Carol's jaw tightened with frustration. In her mind, his lack of immediate response was further proof that something was wrong. She tapped again, this time pushing her finger into his shoulder through the fabric of his hoodie, hard enough to be uncomfortable. "Sir," she said loudly. Not the quiet voice the manual recommended. Loud enough that the businessman reading a newspaper in seat 3A looked up with a frown on his face. Loud enough that several passengers turned their heads. James stirred. His body registered the discomfort. His eyes slowly opened, confused and disoriented the way anyone is when pulled suddenly from deep sleep. He pulled out one earbud and looked up, his brain trying to process where he was and what was happening. Yeah. His voice was rough and scratchy from sleep, from exhaustion, from too many hours of talking in negotiations. "I need to see your boarding pass," Carol demanded. There was no "good morning." No "sorry to disturb you, sir." No "when you have a moment." Just the cold, hard demand delivered in a tone that assumed guilt before innocence. James blinked several times, trying to clear the fog from his mind and wake up enough to understand what was happening. I scanned it at the gate. The machine beeped green. "I need to see it now," Carol repeated, her arms crossing over her chest in a posture that body language experts would recognize as defensive and hostile. "There has been a seating error that I need to verify immediately." This was a complete lie. Carol had not checked the seating chart on the computer system at the galley. She had not looked at the passenger manifest that clearly listed every person on the flight and their assigned seats. She had not done any verification at all. She had made an assumption based purely on what James looked like, and now she was inventing justifications for that assumption after the fact. James rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands, trying to clear his vision and wake up fully. "It is on my phone. Just give me a second to unlock it and find the app." "I do not have time to wait while you search through your phone," Carol snapped, her tone becoming sharper and more aggressive with each word. "We are about to close the cabin door and push back from the gate. If you cannot immediately produce proof that you are assigned to this seat, I need you to gather your belongings and move to the economy cabin where you actually belong." James was fully awake now. The fog of sleep was clearing from his mind. And with it came a familiar, unwelcome feeling that he had experienced too many times in his 39 years of life. He had felt this feeling in department stores where security guards followed him through the aisles, pretending to reorganize shelves while watching his every move. In restaurants where hostesses said they had no tables available, then seated a white family who arrived after him. In hotels where desk clerks asked multiple times for his confirmation number and credit card, their eyes showing doubt that he could afford the room. In parking lots where people clutched their purses tighter when he walked past, or quickly locked their car doors. In elevators where white women moved to the corner and watched him nervously. In his own neighborhood where police stopped him 3 times in 1 year, asking what he was doing there, even though he lived there. It was the feeling of being judged before speaking a word. Of being seen as suspicious, as dangerous, as someone who did not belong, simply because of the color of his skin. Of having to prove his humanity, his right to exist in certain spaces, over and over again. James had learned to navigate these situations carefully. He had learned to keep his voice calm and his hands visible. He had learned to avoid any gesture that could be seen as aggressive. He had learned to document everything when possible. He had learned that anger, no matter how justified, would only be used against him. These were survival skills that his father had taught him. That his uncles had reinforced. That his friends understood without words. Skills that every black man in America learns, whether he wants to or not. "My name is James Carter," he said calmly. "I am in seat 2A. Check your list." "I do not have a James Carter on my first-class list," Carol lied. James stared at her. "Check again." "Sir, your attitude is becoming a problem," Carol said, her voice rising. "If you do not cooperate, I will call security." Other passengers were now watching. The woman in seat 4B had her phone out, recording. James took a deep breath. He was too tired to argue. But part of him wanted to see how far she would go. "I am not moving," James said quietly. "This is my seat. Check your list properly." Carol's face turned red. "Fine. You made your choice." She marched back to the galley. "Lisa, call security." Tell them we have a passenger in 2A who refuses to show ID and is being aggressive. Lisa's eyes went wide. Aggressive? But he is just sitting there. He refused to cooperate, Carol said. Call them now. Lisa picked up the phone with shaking hands. 3 minutes later, 2 security officers walked onto the plane. Behind them was Kevin Torres, the gate supervisor. What is the problem? Kevin asked Carol. Carol pointed at James. The passenger in 2A refuses to show ID. He claims he is James Carter, but I do not have that name on my list. I think he boarded in the wrong group. Kevin pulled out his tablet and checked the passenger list. His face changed. Carol, Kevin said slowly, there is a James Carter on this flight. Seat 2A. First class. Paid ticket. Carol's expression cracked for a moment. But she recovered quickly. Then it must be fraud, she insisted. Look at him. Look at his clothes. Does that look like a first-class passenger? Kevin looked uncomfortable. Carol, if his name is on the list. Something is wrong, Carol interrupted. I can feel it. I have a duty to check. The 2 security officers moved forward. The lead officer was named Officer Blake. He was a large man with a serious face. Which passenger? Blake asked. Seat 2A, Carol pointed. The officers walked down the aisle. Every passenger was watching now. Several had phones out. James saw them coming. He did not look scared. He looked tired and sad. Sir, Officer Blake said, we need you to step into the aisle. James looked up at him. For what reason? Report of a passenger refusing crew instructions, Blake said. I am sleeping in my seat, James said calmly. How is that refusing? Sir, just come with us, Blake ordered. We can sort this out at the gate. James looked past the officers at Carol standing in the galley with her arms crossed. He could see the judgment in her eyes. Okay, James said quietly. I will come. But you are all making a mistake. We will sort it out, Officer Blake said. James unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He was tall, over 6 feet. Officer Blake tensed. I am not resisting, James said clearly, raising his hands. I am cooperating. Everyone can see that. He said this because he knew these situations could be twisted later. He needed witnesses. Just step into the aisle, Blake ordered. James stepped out. The second officer moved behind him. They were about to take him off the plane. Then a voice crackled over the intercom. Stop. Do not move that passenger. A man in a captain's uniform rushed onto the plane. He was moving so fast he nearly knocked over a passenger. His face was red. He was breathing hard. This was not the flight's captain. This was someone more important. Captain Michael Stevens was the chief pilot for Skyline Airline's southern region. He oversaw hundreds of flights and thousands of crew members. He rarely came to individual gates. But now he was here, running, looking panicked. He held his phone like it was on fire. Let him go. Captain Stevens shouted at the officers. Step away from him now. Officer Blake frowned. Captain, we have a crew report. I do not care about the report. Stevens interrupted, his voice cracking. Step away from that passenger immediately. The officers stepped back, confused. Carol moved forward. Captain Stevens, I can explain. This passenger. Carol, Stevens said, his voice filled with horror. Do you know who this man is? Carol hesitated. He said James Carter, but... Do you know who James Carter is? Stevens repeated louder. Carol shook her head. No, but that does not matter. Stop talking, Stevens ordered. It was not a request. He turned to James. His whole expression changed to fear and respect. "Mr. Carter," Stevens said, his voice shaking. "Sir, I am so sorry. I just got an emergency alert from our headquarters. I ran here as fast as I could." James stood with his hands still raised. "Alert about what?" Stevens took a breath. "Sir, you are the regional director of the Federal Aviation Administration. You oversee airline safety and operations for the entire southern United States." The cabin went completely silent. Stevens continued, his voice carrying to everyone. "Mr. Carter has federal authority to ground planes. To suspend crew members. To investigate safety violations and discrimination. He can shut down fleets. He can revoke airline certificates." He looked at Carol with pure horror. "And you just had security remove him from his seat because of how he looks." The woman in 4B who was recording gasped. Her video was still running. Kevin closed his eyes and whispered something. The security officers stepped further back, their faces showing shock. Carol's face went white. I did not know. How was I supposed to know?" "You were not supposed to know," James said quietly. "You were supposed to check the list before assuming I did not belong because I am black and wearing comfortable clothes." Carol opened her mouth but nothing came out. James turned to Captain Stevens. "How many complaints have been filed against Ms. Hayes in the past year?" Stevens' eyes widened. He knew James already knew the answer. "Sir, I would need to check." "I already know," James said, pulling out his phone. 12 complaints in 10 months. 8 from passengers of color. All dismissed as misunderstandings. He looked at Carol. "You have a pattern." Carol's eyes filled with tears. "This is not fair. I was doing my job." "Your job," James interrupted, "is not racial profiling." He turned to Stevens. "I want her off this plane. She does not fly today. And I want a full investigation into her behavior and your airline's training." Stevens nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Immediately." He looked at Carol. "Ms. Hayes, you are removed from this flight. You are suspended. Report to HR immediately." "Wait," Carol cried. "You cannot fire me. I have 16 years. "You had 16 years, James corrected. "You just threw them away by judging me for 3 minutes instead of checking a computer for 3 seconds. Stevens added, "You racially profiled a passenger. You filed a false security report. You violated federal regulations. Even your union cannot save you from that." Carol looked around desperately. She looked at Lisa, who looked away. She looked at passengers, who stared with disgust. She looked at the officers, who avoided eye contact. She had no support. "You have 2 minutes to get your things and leave," James said quietly. Carol grabbed her purse with shaking hands. She walked toward the exit, her legs unsteady. As she passed James, she stopped. "You just ruined my life," she said bitterly. James looked at her with tired eyes. "No, Ms. Hayes. You ruined your own life when you decided my skin color meant I did not belong in a seat I paid for." Carol left the plane. Her footsteps echoed in the silent cabin. After Carol left, Captain Stevens cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this delay. Mr. Carter, is there anything we can do for you?" "I want to sleep," James said simply. "That is all I wanted from the start." "Of course, sir." Stevens turned to Lisa. "Ms. Martinez, you are now lead flight attendant. Please take care of everyone." Lisa nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, sir." As the crew prepared for departure, James returned to seat 2A. He sat down, put his earbuds in, and closed his eyes. This time, no one disturbed him. The flight to Miami was smooth. Lisa checked on James once to offer water, which he accepted. Otherwise, she left him alone. When the plane landed in Miami at 9:15 a.m., James gathered his bag. As he walked off, Captain Stevens was waiting. "Mr. Carter," Stevens said quietly, "what happens now?" James looked at him. "Now you fix your airline's culture. You take those 12 complaints seriously. You do real training about bias. And you make sure this never happens to anyone else." "Yes, sir," Stevens promised. James walked off the plane. By the time he reached the exit, his phone was exploding with messages. The video had gone viral. The woman in 4B had posted it on social media within minutes of the plane taking off. She had posted it on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. The caption said, "Flight attendant calls security on black man in first class. Turns out he runs aviation safety. Instant regret." In 2 hours, the video had 6 million views. By the time James landed in Miami, it had reached 15 million views across all platforms. The comments section was on fire. Thousands of people were sharing their own stories of discrimination in airports and on planes. Others were praising James for staying calm. Some were calling for Carol to be fired immediately. News channels were picking up the story. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. James scrolled through some of the comments as he walked through the airport. This is America in 2024. Still judging people by their skin color. I flew with that attendant 2 years ago. She treated my family terribly too. Now I know it was not just me. Look how calm he stayed. I would have lost my temper completely. Every black person knows this feeling. Being treated like you do not belong, even when you paid for your seat. Skyline Airlines needs to fire her today. This is unacceptable. He is literally the person who decides if airlines can operate. She messed with the wrong one. This goes beyond one bad employee. This is about training and culture at these airlines. News outlets were calling for interviews. CNN wanted him on their evening show. The New York Times wanted a statement. Civil rights leaders were calling. Even the White House press office reached out. Skyline Airlines stock price had dropped 3% on the news. The company's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. People were posting photos of their Skyline Airlines frequent flyer cards and scissors, cutting them up. The hashtag Justice for James was trending nationally, along with Flying While Black and Boycott Skyline. James did not smile. He did not feel victorious. He just felt tired. This was not the first time he had been profiled. It would not be the last. But this time, he had power to create consequences. And he would use that power. 3 weeks after the incident on Flight 289, major changes swept through Skyline Airlines like a storm that had been building for years. Carol Hayes was fired after a thorough investigation showed a clear, undeniable pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning multiple years. The investigation team reviewed every complaint filed against her. They interviewed passengers who had negative experiences. They examined security camera footage from previous flights. They found more complaints that were never officially filed because passengers thought nothing would be done, that their voices did not matter, that complaining would be pointless. The investigation discovered that Carol had made passengers of color feel unwelcome in first class at least 20 times that could be documented. She had questioned their tickets. She had given them poor service. She had seated them in less desirable locations when she had the authority to do so. She had made comments about their clothing, their luggage, their right to be there. 8 passengers who had filed formal complaints in the past 2 years received personal apology letters from the CEO of Skyline Airlines, along with compensation that included free flights, refunds, and frequent flyer miles. Several of those passengers later gave interviews to news channels, sharing their stories of how Carol had made them feel small, unwelcome, and judged. Carol tried to fight the termination through her union representative. She hired a lawyer. She claimed she was being made a scapegoat for systemic problems. She argued that she was just following her training and instincts. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The viral video showing her refusing to check the computer. The pattern of complaints. Her failure to follow basic procedures that every flight attendant learns in training. The testimony of other crew members who had witnessed her behavior over the years. Her union representative privately advised her to accept the termination and move on, explaining that fighting would only prolong the pain and cost her money she did not have. Her lawyer told her the same thing. She had no case. The evidence was too strong. The public opinion was too negative. Skyline Airlines implemented mandatory implicit bias training for all employees. Not just flight attendants, but also pilots, gate agents, customer service representatives, mechanics, managers, and executives. Everyone from the CEO to the newest baggage handler had to complete the training. The training was real and meaningful, not just a video to watch and a box to check. It was developed in partnership with civil rights organizations who understood discrimination from the victim's perspective. It included real stories, real scenarios, real consequences. Annual refresher courses became required, with employment consequences for those who failed to complete them or failed the assessment tests. The complaint system was changed. Now the system looked for patterns. Any employee with 3 similar complaints in 1 year got automatic review. Lisa Martinez was promoted to senior flight attendant. She joined a committee working to improve company culture. Captain Stevens personally managed the reforms and checked complaint data every 3 months. The Federal Aviation Administration, after James's report and the viral video, investigated discrimination in air travel. They sent guidance to all airlines saying racial profiling violates federal law and could result in fines or loss of licenses. Other airlines reviewed their own training, hoping to avoid similar problems. And James Carter continued his work at the FAA, flying across the country for safety reviews. He still sometimes flew first class. He still sometimes wore a hoodie when he was tired. But now, when flight attendants saw him bored, they checked their lists first and their assumptions second. 6 months after the incident, James returned to Dallas for a follow-up review of Skyline Airlines. He deliberately booked Flight 289, the same route, at the same time, in Seat 2A. He wore a hoodie and sweatpants again. When he boarded, the flight attendant greeted him with a smile. She checked her tablet, saw his name, and said, "Good morning, Mr. Carter. Welcome aboard. Can I get you anything?" She did not question him. She did not demand his pass. She did not call security. She simply did her job, treating him like every other passenger. James smiled. "Just water, please." As he settled into 2A and closed his eyes, he felt something different from 6 months ago. Peace. Not because the problem of racial bias was solved. That was far from solved. But because this one space, on this one flight, had changed. Because Carol's assumptions had created consequences that rippled outward. Because sometimes the system worked. And that was worth fighting for. This story spread across the country. It was shared millions of times. People talked about it at dinner tables, in offices, in schools. Some people said Carol was just doing her job. But most people understood the truth. Carol was not doing her job. Her job was to check the passenger list. Her job was to treat all passengers equally. Her job was to provide service, not suspicion. What Carol did was make an assumption based on race. She saw a black man in casual clothes and decided he did not belong. She never checked facts. She never verified information. She just assumed. And her assumption destroyed her career. But the story is bigger than Carol. It is bigger than one flight attendant. It is about a pattern that exists everywhere in America. In stores, restaurants, hotels, airports, and streets. The pattern of assuming black and brown people do not belong in certain spaces. James Carter's story became a lesson. A reminder that you cannot judge people by their appearance. A reminder that assumptions hurt real people. A reminder that power comes in many forms. The most important lesson was simple: check facts before making judgments. Treat everyone with equal respect. See people as human beings, not stereotypes. Because the person you judge today might be the person who holds your future tomorrow. Because everyone deserves dignity, regardless of how they look or what they wear. Because in the end, we all want the same thing: to be treated fairly, to be seen as individuals, to exist in spaces we have every right to be in without having to prove we belong. James Carter proved that day on Flight 289 that respect should not depend on titles or positions or clothes or skin color. Respect should be universal. And that is a lesson worth learning.